All right, welcome everyone. I'm Charlie O'Donnell with Next NYC. And Ryan, welcome to our interview. And thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
So, I've been following your journey with Jolie now for three years. You're three,
3 years.
3 years
Yeah,
now.
3 years this January.
And every post about the company's growth and achievements is just another twist of the knife because I am one of probably many these said no to a consumer product. But I want every single founder that I say no to make me regret it, right? That's
Can
what I
I
think
can
that's
can,
pretty interesting.
can I just comment on that one moment and then we'll move to the meat of it. We met or chatted with six venture capitalists, basically people who I thought were, sort of best in class in consumer, you being one of them. You all passed. So yes, there was 100% pass on this opportunity from the venture community, and I thank you for that.
Let me ask you about that actually. Do you think that there were, like, if you were a VC at the time, were there things that was the pass justified given the risk, or were there things that you feel in hindsight that somebody should have been able to count on you to achieve? Like, was it a bad pass or a good pass? A lot of founders are like, yeah, it was really hard. It was a crazy investment at the time.
Yeah. Well, no, look, as an investor, two-time founder and advisor, I think it was a bad pass. I think what was happening at the time was there was all this sort of shiny new stuff out there, and consumer was beginning getting a really bad rap for some very valid reasons, by the way. This wasn't that. And I sort of explained like how I saw the world, how like we believe everybody's going to have a filtering shower over time. There's a recurring revenue model. We think the model is going to stick, and all of that just sort of got ignored or not enough to get to a yes. That's where I think understanding a vision early makes early stage investors sort of tolerant of the unknowns. It sort of leans into the founder to say, this person has done enough research where I have confidence in it. It may not work exactly as they plan it, but it looks like there's going to be a real market here. And I think now, 3 years later, that's sort of obvious.
Gotcha. So let's just take a status check. I don't think you've announced numbers yet for last year, but things are going pretty well. Give us a little synopsis of, the company's progress over the last couple of years and just like where you are now in terms of company size and customers, just so we could establish like things are going pretty well so far.
Yeah. So I'll just give you the basic numbers because it's only 3 years. It's easy. Year one was 4 million in revenue. Year two was 28 million in revenue. Last year was 40 million in revenue. We've sold about 380,000 Jolies in the world. We are partnered with Nordstrom, Ulta, Air One. We're in about over 1,000 professional hair salons, full-time team of four, and double-digit EBITDA. We got profitable in our fifth month in business, and we have almost $20 million in recurring revenue booked for this year alone in subscription. So yeah, all in.
And you're also at the Blackstone Collective, which is where my wife and daughter get their haircut. And we would be there
Wow,
Saturday.
they have excellent hair care, your family. Yes, we are at the Blackstone Collective. And it's, sort of accounts like that are really interesting in their influence, right? Because sort of hair professionals really understand what water does to the clientele's hair. So great partners. So yeah, business is really good. And I think it's one of those, what I thought would happen is happening, probably a little bit faster, frankly. I was a little more conservative in where I thought we'd be, but we're happy about that.
Cool. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but at Greats, I don't remember you being as out there as a CEO in the transparency, personal posting and all of that sort of stuff. Is that a shift for you? And like, why did you shift that?
Well, my in my inner circle, I was just as sort of outspoken. It's just I was not leveraging the tool of LinkedIn, mostly because it was just, startup one, right? Like you're sort of it's boot camp, man. You know this better than anybody, and I'm sure all your listeners do. I was overwhelmed with just sort of the trying to build a thing, right? The second time around is a little different, and there was all the learnings from greats is without question um, informed sort of what Jolie is and allows us to operate in a much different way. What I felt like my takeaway from greats was, and we wound up exiting that business to Steve Madden, was wow, that was a really, really valuable lesson. And I need to share my learnings. Like that's why I started a second company because I thought if I didn't, it would be what a waste of a learning. And I wanted to get more vocal about what's possible.
So I appreciate the altruism around wanting to share. And there are a lot of founders probably sitting here going like, yeah, I get that, but I could also teach class after I exit this business. I'm sure it's got to have some immediate or just, ROI to you as a founder. So like what are you actually getting out of it other than I've learned a lot and I'm a nice guy, so I'm going to share. It's got to be a little more than that. Otherwise, I'm not sure it'd quite make it into your time budget.
Yeah, I look, one, I don't do it on a consistent basis. So I have to say, selfishly, I only do these things when I'm inspired and it's sort of it just happens. I don't have a calendar. I don't plan this stuff. Frankly, if I did, I wouldn't do it. I'm that type of person. If you said every Monday you got to post at 8 o'clock on LinkedIn, I would fail. I would absolutely fail at doing that. So I do it more of a free flow. That being said, personally, my ROI is the satisfaction of sharing. It's not that it's pure altruism. It's just sort of like I know how hard it is for founders to get through every day. It's so fucking hard. And like sometimes all it takes is that one like great story that goes, yeah, see, that person did it too. I can do it. It's an inspirational moment. And if I can just do that once, then all of the things that I'm doing is sort of beneficial to me. So ROI personally, like it's just I just hope it helps somebody. And I believe it is, right? And I'll give you an example of something very specific that happened on LinkedIn. Fifth Avenue owed us $15,000 for almost a year. I turned that into an opportunity. Now, most people are like, "You did it to collect the money," and I'm like, "I did not," and I'll tell you why. I went and I shared it because I wanted everybody to know, like, getting into sex is not all that it seems to be. Retail in general. If they're not going to pay you, what's the point of being here? Ultimately, 2 weeks later, that they actually wrote a check within 2 weeks of that post, which got 80,000 reads. All of a sudden, we get the pay. I gave that money away. I turned that into an opportunity to say, if there's any companies that are owed money by Saks for more than 90 days, and you have this much cash left on your balance sheet, DM me. I got hundreds of DMs, and we picked one lucky winner essentially, and we wired her $15,000. I don't know, that what was the ROI on that? That was one, the media value was way beyond what I could have ever, but the intent was I'm going to turn this into a lesson. The result was media value. Ultimately, that was written about in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and New York Times. That was not my plan, if that makes sense.
No, I totally understand that. So it's interesting. Is the process of writing actually? No, I'll pull back just to comment on your like you're not writing on Mondays at 8.
I wish I could, by the way.
As do I. Listen, I have been writing for 20 plus years and I have never established a writing schedule. And I envy people who, wake up at a certain time and, write every day the whole, Stephen
Sorry,
King page.
sorry, my son was yelling goodbye, and I wanted to make sure I.
No, 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 no worries at all. Totally get it. So, what is your filter for interestingness? Because I feel like a lot of times interesting people don't know why they're interesting. So a lot of people go through this like, who's going to care about this? Why does this thing hit your radar? What boxes does something have to check for you to want to say, this is shareable. I want to put this out there.
My filter is really: is it going to help another founder or startup? I'm not very political. Frankly, I'm not political, at least online. Everything is sort of oriented around building a company. And, think I've taken shots at venture capital, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, but that's easy.
Because yeah, but we shouldn't, beat the small guy. Not that VC is small. I think that I want people to understand that there's a different way, and I think this is what founders need to remember. There's groupthink in the investment community, all the way up the ranks, from VC all the way to private equity and the like. And that's not really the way you should probably think. Probably think like, well, if everybody's doing that, is there a different way? And my goal is to continually show and challenge the status quo. And I think Jolie is a perfect example of that. We got 100% pass by an industry. It was a small subset of six people, but really, really, really well respected six people. And they didn't understand what we were trying to do. A year later, most of them came back and said, "Do you want money now?" Because it was more established. But founders need to understand that by thinking different, you may find a better path.
Totally get that. You're not really. Well, actually, do you think you would still be doing it if things weren't going as well?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't have a choice, really. I mean, I mean,
No,
I'm,
like the
I'm,
share. Like if the
oh,
struggles, like it's nice to be able to say, hey, our revenue, last year went from 40,
yeah.
from 28 to 40, right? But sometimes revenue's flat, and I don't know if you would share that.
I mean, great point. I think I would, but I can't say with certainty because that has not happened. There are examples of things though, like TikTok. Just recently, I posted about TikTok where I was sort of excited about the TikTok pause because I was like, oh, great. This is going to be a forced holdout on TikTok, and we're going to get to figure out attribution even more than we believe. And I'm a supporter of TikTok. I think TikTok is a better channel for a certain demographic for transactions. It's winning there. Meta,
Today's social shopping network.
I do not have that opinion. It's actually pretty negative. And within 10 hours, my whole TikTok team from TikTok is like, yay, we're back online. And I'm like, yeah, well, great. We're still not advertising. And we took the whole week of not spending any money on TikTok, even though the performance of TikTok was strong and worth investing in up until that moment. What I learned was something really, really valuable. Like the reporting window of attribution is always going to benefit the platform the longer you keep it. And what we should always be doing is like, thinking about a shorter actual setting, essentially 1 day click, 7 day view is basically what it is, and let's operate within that window. And that's now what we're doing, even though we were trying to experiment with different things and triangulate the value, but doing this 1 week holdout sort of helped us clarify that. So there's a like slightly negative or self-inflicted harm, right? Because our traffic actually cascaded down over the week we weren't advertising on TikTok.
But you had put out there that you were going to do this, and you committed to it.
And now I have to go back and actually report what happened, right? Because we just turned it back on Saturday. If I wrote at 8 a.m. every Monday, that would have been already up, but I don't. And now I'll share what happened. Hopefully that helps other people like dial in their marketing. I talked negatively about Meta for years. I was a very early disbeliever in the value that Meta provided to brands and continue to have that position and proof, data, like, and I'll share this on your channel. We spend $150,000 a month on Meta. That's it. That's it. Our marketing budget is much, 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 much bigger than that, and our revenue plan for this year is $56 million. So we're going to spend, you know, about $1.5 million on a channel where most people are spending in our size, tens of millions of dollars. And the only difference I would say is we're profitable and most of them are not. So
Yeah.
you do the math.
Yeah, no, exactly. Tactically speaking, I'm curious about a couple of lessons. So, I don't know how you organize your time day to day, but when you do sit down to write and to post, do you time block? Do you say, listen, I got an hour to get something out there? Do you draft? Do you ask other people to do a once over? Do you have somebody on your comms team that freaks out every time they see a post because they don't know what you're posting? What's the actual process look like?
all the comms freak out has happened in the past, and I always appreciate the input, and usually I'm well aware of the potential negative feedback we might get. And again, I think when you're going to do this sort of stuff, and this is sort of founder, again, back to founder, it's just a contact sport. And if you're going to like hide behind a bunch of stuff, you're not going to be a very happy person. You're not going to be satisfied. All right. I certainly am not calling out individuals or people, but I am going to share my opinion on things. And I am going to share what we're doing and not be afraid of it, knowing that that's going to come with a lot of pushback. And that happens every post, frankly. In terms of it's just such a free thought that happens. Like once the thing comes into my head, Charlie, I go, okay, I gotta do this, and as long as I'm not on a call or in a scheduled meeting, I just go do it. I don't commit to a time. They usually happen very, very quickly. They're highly raw and unedited to the point where my wife will then go, "Hey, great pace. Here's 4 typos." Like that's what my wife does. She spell checks my whole thing. And that happens often, right?
Grammarly,
So
there's a Grammarly plugin.
I don't, again, like that would be too advanced for me for the sort of the way I like to write is so raw that if it's not raw, it's not real to me. I don't fabricate this stuff. It's super emotional and they come from different places. Like it just happens at different moments. That's how I do it. I'm not suggesting that's even possible for others, but that's how I approach it.
Is there any kind of pushback, or have you posted something where you immediately got some kind of response that made you maybe regret posting?
I'm sure there is, but let me think about. Yeah, there definitely is. Nothing's
Or
popping
what
in my
would
mind.
make you regret? Like, what is the kind of feedback that would go, you'd go, I don't know, I kind of am over my skis on
Yeah,
this.
look, if I said something that was off color, that was completely misinterpreted, right? Like sometimes I'm pretty spicy. I curse all the time, and that can be offensive to people. Um, if a mom emailed me and said, my 12-year-old son loves your post, why do you have to say these things? Like that would sort of be like, oh shit, okay, I didn't realize that a 12-year-old's reading my post. I love that, but I should probably tone down my language. That would be an example, right? I don't want it to be. I certainly don't. I don't hate people, so I don't even go to that zone. I don't use Twitter at all. You sort of be surprised. Like LinkedIn is probably the area that I spend the most time because it's the most informative to me personally, and it's a place where I think others are going for sort of real information experience from founders. The rest of the stuff is noise to me, and I don't allow noise to come into my personal life, full stop. So I hope I'm not doing that to others.
Gotcha. Is it something that you think, if I was a first time founder, just processing my learnings, that would be worthwhile? Or do you have an opinion either way as to whether a first time founder should be sharing in this way?
Yeah, I think there's a spectrum here. This isn't like I'm higher on the hierarchy. Like everybody's on their journey, and wherever you are, there's somebody that's a little further than you and somebody that's not as far as you. Everybody needs to pick where they're if a first time founder should definitely do it. One, most importantly, if they get value out of it for themselves personally, if it's fulfilling, they enjoy the process, whatever the reason. And two, there's probably somebody that would read that and go, that's helpful. And to me, that's the founder community needs to stay supportive of each other. It just does. It's just so hard. It's so hard. And there is just different agendas when you take on institutional capital. There are many, many times where those two groups, even though they're in the same company, are not aligned. And founders need some real strength and support from people that are just going to, tell them the truth and sometimes the hard truth. But in many times, the hard truth through the lens of I'm trying to help you and I'm not trying to return on my investment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. How do you make it not hustle porn, or, the kind of, founders like, "Oh, everything's great." Like there's a certain type, as you
Everything is
said,
not great. It really isn't. Again, I think this is where I'm talking about Jolie's experience right now, and Jolie's experience is pretty damn good. So I'm not going to look for negative just to balance the thing. But But people need to understand, and I talk about this and I pepper it in, that grades was really, really fucking hard. And it was that that made this one easier. So if any, and maybe I should just do a post on this again, just very specific. It's just going to be hard. Even when it's easy, it's hard. So people need to appreciate that. And maybe I should talk about that more.
One of the things that I always tell people, and I can literally see it like a light bulb in your head, when you start sharing your idea generation for what is a post and what is worth sharing is on in a way that like you could go into this and have no idea what you're going to share, but when you do it on a regular basis, it reminds me of like when I first started using Instagram, that like I used to walk about my day and not notice anything visually. And then all of a sudden, when I had the app, I was like, oh, there's a little square of
Yeah.
interest in
Yeah.
this, right? Like
Yeah.
a little reflection. Like I started noticing things because my brain was aware that I had the means to share. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, that could be worth sharing. I might get something out of it. You recognize it when you're in that process.
I think it was Stephen King that said like his advice to writers is like write every day no matter what. Like I get that. If I did this more consistently as a practice, I'd probably get better and overcome my fear of committing to a time and a day of a post, which is probably more an insecurity than it is anything else. Like I just don't want one more thing that I have to deliver on. Maybe is, and I'll work on that.
Has this become your board in a way? Like not having institutional investors, there's a sort of dialogue that happens with certain stakeholders in the company. And I feel like to some extent, like you've made all of us your stakeholders that you're sort of checking in with on how things are going and what's hard and sort of, a little bit of a cadence here.
That's interesting. I never thought of it like that. I do want to, I think there's good boards and bad boards like everything else. For me, not having a board has been incredibly liberating and like allowing again, as a first time, I don't think they would be as productive. As a second time, I think there were so many lessons, and it's like this is how boards function, and this is sort of the time it takes to sort of manage the board, which is a quite a lot. And there's stages of businesses where that could be counterproductive, right? We eventually probably should have a board, right? At some point, you get at some point, but as I say that, I'm like, well, maybe never. Maybe Jolie never has a board because we have access to the things we'd get from a board. They're just not from investors. Like we have plenty of relationships with really smart people that are on boards, that are actually investors, that are founders. And are we getting the same value from them? The answer is question mark. Don't know yet.
Is the
But yeah,
sharing
I never
connecting
thought of LinkedIn as a potential board placement, if you will.
is the sharing connecting you and lighting up your network a little better? Like, is that a benefit where you get in conversations more with certain types of people, or you go to reach out to someone and they've already been following along, so they kind of get a sense of what's going on in the company or who you are?
I'll be honest. I'm overwhelmed with how positive that experience has been and the amount of support that it's gotten and how many people actually read them. Because again, I didn't set out to say I need to build a network of people that are going to read my posts. I set out as an
You're not
outlet to
growth
say,
hacking this thing. You just put stuff out there. You're not.
yeah. And I sort of like I want other people to like learn the lessons that I'm learning. I want to share them and hopefully it helps somebody. That was sort of it. And whether one person reads it or 10,000. And but it gets pretty good coverage across the board and it's inspired. Yes, it's improved relationships. Yes, I think it's improved credibility, but it also has some detractor. It's sort of like, wow, Ryan's really outspoken. Like some people just don't want to hear that, right? They want to just be in their nice little bubble and not have that sort of voice in the room. And this is just who I am. Always been that way.
There's no retailer that's like, nah, this guy's a loose cannon. We don't want to carry his product because of it. Or maybe there is.
Not yet, but not that I know of. But I feel like we're in the stores we want to be in. But no, there hasn't been. And I'm generally supportive. Like, not generally, there is dysfunction in retail. I say that all the time. I don't say it about a specific retailer. It's an industry wide thing because it still operates in its it's 100-year-old industry, older, and it still sort of operates that way. As a founder, that's frustrating. I want them to learn faster and get smarter and use all these great tools that are available instead of protecting the legacy thought, because the legacy thought is a dinosaur. And I actually wrote that about Saks and the merger of like this merger of Saks and what is it? Neiman Marcus
Yeah, I think so.
is not going to save the dysfunction of either of them. It's just going to prolong some breath. But the tar pit is right over there and they're walking into it. So, as I did call out those companies because the context was, and I hope you appreciate this, was they owed me and hundreds of small businesses tens, 20, $100,000. And yet they were about able to pull off this $2.8 billion debt merger. That's unfair to the people that are fucking paying their rent, period. And I call that out. Most people wouldn't do that.
Well, and I think there's a lot. I think there's a line between constructive and petty. And that, like, you can be critical, but I think that's one thing that I really appreciated of that particular criticism. Petty is when it's like only about you, right? Like somebody wronged me and now I'm going to like share it and
Yeah.
now you're dealing with my stuff. But everything that you shared about that experience was like it's not just us actually. And hey, by the way, we're generally okay in the grand scheme of things, but what about the people who aren't? Because this is a really hard business. There's a lot of people smaller than us. And when you can use your platform to speak for others who are worse off, then it's not a petty grievance. Then it's really it's leadership to some extent.
Well, I appreciate that, which is why we gave the money away when we to somebody that, and again, we're very, very fortunate. Come from a broken family. My dad abandoned us when I was 8. I've been working my whole life. I know what it's like to be on the other side of hard, like really hard. So when I'm in a situation to help, and one, I think that message helped because I got hundreds of messages from people saying, "Thank God you said this. I'm so glad it's not me. I didn't know what to do." All of that. And then we were able to actually give the money that Saks paid me because I was the squeaky wheel. They didn't pay the other people. So that's not right. They shouldn't operate that way. But I was able to give it to somebody that needed it more. And that was like probably the most gratifying experience I've ever had on LinkedIn, and shows you the power of honesty, transparency, and just speaking the truth. Like, because it wasn't about me at all. It wasn't about Jolie. It was about, this is wrong, Sachs. You shouldn't do this.
Yeah, for sure. The one thing in my experience, I think in the past, I have spoken up in that way while I was like not at my own firm. I think of an experience when, you know, I when I joined First Round back in 2009, it was right after I had started a company and failed, but I was sort of used to being a CEO, even though I wasn't particularly good at it. And you know, I'd sort of say things that I would get this like immediate sort of entrepreneur community feedback of like, oh yeah, you tell them, you know, this thing sucks, right? And then, you know, inevitably the phone rings and, you know, it's a partner of First Round going, hey, I just heard from somebody about this thing you said. It's like, oh right, I have colleagues, I have coworkers. Maybe I should keep that in mind too before I go optimizing for entrepreneur community.
Yeah. But I don't think you were doing it for applause, probably, right? It just sort of
No,
but yes, and look, the reason I became a founder is because I was tired of working inside a corporate structure, which did not allow me to correct the things that I felt the companies were doing wrong. There's just a lot of, this is the way we do it. It happens everywhere. And the bigger the companies get, it becomes more grounded, right? It's harder to shift those. And that was really, really frustrating to me. And ultimately, I had a choice. I said, I can either stop complaining about the thing I've been doing for 15 years because I can't change that, or go do something that you can sort of own and operate and be responsible for the outcome, good or bad, right? Is sort of, you get to do what you think is right. And that's, for me, that was a better choice.
Do you think there's any effect on the company's ability to hire or generate candidates? Like just putting the company, making it more visible. I don't know if any candidates have come through or saying, hey, I want to work for you or anything like that, or just to get a sense of like, I read your stuff, I get a sense of what it might be like to work for you. And maybe people, weed themselves out of that process.
There is a wealth of value that's coming from these posts. Again, that wasn't what can I get from LinkedIn posting? It didn't start there, but yes, to your point, we get inbound interest from people that want to work with us. We get inbound interest from retailers. We get inbound interest from writers that are writing an article on a certain topic, being the most recent, which Bloomberg wrote about. And I spent a bunch of time with that writer over the course of 7 days because that was a sort of weird one. Like, story was going to be this, but then it turned into that. So, yeah, there's a ton of value. And that's a nice side benefit, but that's not, to this moment, that's not why I do it.
Let me ask you about being someone who is creating media and content. What does that mean for your take on, for example, like I don't know if you guys have third party PR and, just the media landscape. You're talking to reporters, but you're also sort of creating content yourself. Like, do you feel like that gives you a little bit of a insider perspective on the company's, not insider, but like as someone who is actively participating in the ecosystem, what is your take on what that means for the media landscape and all of that sort of stuff?
That's a really interesting question because media has evolved and continues to change, and like the Substack space is equally as valuable as working at a publication that was considered, the holy grail. I think yes, I think I'm inspiring. So I'm inspiring some stories that has happened. So that's really interesting. I'm getting, last year we spoke at HBS, and that was sort of, they wanted to talk at that sort of day that I was actually, they wanted to talk about some of the stuff I wrote. So obviously it's sort of getting to certain places of academia and those sort of students. So that was really insightful. I was like, wow, this is crazy that this professor knows about this stuff. And maybe he just learned about it in his research when it was like, oh, Ryan's showing up tomorrow. I should probably do a little more research. But so like I, as I'm talking to you about this, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of upside here, right? Like, and if I did want to put some business thought to it, I could probably extract a ton more value. I probably won't because like I
So
already
you
have a
wanna
business. I have exactly. It's super fun and gratifying the way I'm doing it for me, right? Like the way for me, this is the way I like to do it. And if I made it something else, I would probably not like it as much. I have a lot of responsibilities. I have a young family. I have a company. That's enough for me from the, get business value. This is for me. And like the way I'm doing it is the way it works for me. And I'll probably keep it that way.
what would you say to somebody who says, I feel like I've learned some stuff and it's my responsibility as a CEO to kind of get my company out there and be a little more present, but not comfortable with my writing. I'm a little intimidated about the whole thing. Like, who wants to hear from me? Sort of a confidence thing.
I think that's really common, including of myself, right? Like the reason I don't want to keep this sort of regular cadence is because I don't know if I could actually deliver on it, right? So I'm saying like, oh man, that would be too much commitment. I hear that all the time, and my sort of guidance, and everybody's different, but in general, I'm like, you'd probably be surprised the reaction you get, and it would probably be more positive than you think. Everybody has their own, risk tolerance for everything, and including being, criticized. And I'm not afraid, thankfully, to be criticized. I'm also, I think that's when you get into the thought leadership space. Like when you're able to talk about things pretty openly and transparently and informatively, that's a really rare place. There's just not a lot of people that do it that way. So hopefully that's being appreciated on the other end.
And I do sort of think too that if you have difficulty handling well founded criticism, entrepreneurship is going to be really hard.
It will be impossible, right? Like we're just set, like this is what it is. This is sort of like described it this way. Like an entrepreneur's role is to turn red lights into green lights, and they're pretty much all going to be red, which means you're going to be told no, essentially everywhere you turn, and your job is to figure out how to get that somewhere else. That's what it is. If you want to like boil it down, and you're going to not love what you hear from most people. Sometimes wrongly, by the way. Like, it's not that your investors are smarter than you and they probably can't even appreciate what you do, but they're going to give you their opinion because they're entitled to once you take money from them. That's a cost that you have to bear if you're going to take on institutional capital. So, if you want to be a solo founder and not raise any money because you can't take criticism, then do it that way. I'm not suggesting you do. That's probably even worse. Yeah, entrepreneurship is getting kicked in the teeth a lot.
For sure. One last question before I let you go, because I don't want to take up too much time. I'm curious about your own consumption experience on the other side, right? Like you project out into LinkedIn. Do you manage your consumption of it? Are you a newsletter reader? Like who do you follow that you appreciate? Because I got to imagine that there are sources that are informative to you as a founder as well.
This is a function of media today. I am doing less and less traditional consumption of information, news, media, whatever you want to call it. I'm pretty focused with my time. I'm like very greedy with time, as I think you probably are as well. When you have a child, it sort of changes the perspective of life. But I'm sort of maniacal about it. I'm like, I'll do 15 minutes on Instagram, I'll do 15 minutes on LinkedIn. And I set sort of timers to go through this process. I'll read a bunch of different yeah, there's a guy named Ben Dietz. You might not have ever heard of this because it's not in our founder zone, but he has a great newsletter that puts together really interesting information weekly about all kinds of stuff. And it's a good snapshot into like culture oriented things. So there's probably three or four of those that I read a week. And
Are you paid? Do you have any subscriptions? Any paid Substack subscriptions or anything like that?
yeah, Michael Williams from A Continuous Lean, Ben Dietz was one of them. Snack Shot, I think it's called, which is about the food and beverage sort of industry. Yeah, I do. Yes, I do. But I don't have like
High bar,
50.
heavily curated.
Yes, yes. And not like venture or private, like not business stuff. I read Seeking Alpha, but I don't have a paid subscription. I like the quick highlights, but I also read Bloomberg, right? I do have a subscription to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. Those are like still things I go to, even though I have a different view on how I interpret the data or the information.
Gotcha. Listen, I really appreciate the time. This has been super cool to hear your perspective on it as a follower and a fan, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate your openness and honesty about the process, and it's been fun to
Yeah,
follow.
no, I look, I appreciate the invite and thank you for having me. Appreciate that a lot.